coordinator at the Windham and Windsor Housing Trust at the southeast corner of the state. And I'm here to talk about housing and homelessness and the intersection with early childhood development today. And I'm just so grateful to be here. I just wanted to get a sense of the room before I dive in, see who's here. Can you raise your hand or dance or whatever and just let me know what you are when I'm going to list off a few categories. So do we have childcare providers / teachers? Thank you for what you do. Do we have social service professionals in the room? Thank you. Parents. Nice. And any housing advocates? Everybody. Thank you. So a little bit about me. I grew up in southern Vermont. I studied environmental studies. I became a regional planner by profession. I became a mother, and then I became a mother again. And then I became a housing advocate by profession. And I see affordable housing as the nexus addressing so many of the challenges that we face in Vermont. It's very clear to me that having access to stable, decent, affordable housing is the very first barrier or the first stepping stool to so many more opportunities. So that's where I come from. That's my background and my drive. For today's session, I'll just give you an overview. I want to go over the whole state housing landscape, what it looks like, what challenges we have. Then I'll talk about the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition's legislative priorities. And then after that, we'll go over the very simple asks that you can bring to your legislative lunch today, to your legislators. And I'll just tell you them right off the bat so you can start practicing. Fully fund the VHCB and the Vermont Housing Coalition Board and Conservation Board, and support the Rental Housing and Safety Bill S210. And we'll go into what those mean soon. And then I really want to open the floor to discussion and to experience sharing. What made you sign up for this session today? How do you see housing as an important piece in early childhood? Because when we talk about these things, these are the important stories that you want to bring to your discussions with the legislators. So you want to bring them your easy ask, but you also want to leave them with a story that they can remember and bring with them to further discussions and to negotiations. And I'm excited to hear from all of you. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will go very smoothly. Let me see. All right. Okay. Now, are you seeing? All right. Are you seeing my notes or are you just seeing a presentation?
We're seeing the presentation. It could be in presentation mode. It might be better if you put it in presentation mode, perhaps.
You're seeing my notes?
Yes.
Darn. Okay, I'm going to switch my screen. I'm sorry. I just promise I practiced this, but here we are. Okay. Okay. Bear with me for a second. It might show you the same thing. I'm hoping not.
That's good, Marion. We're just seeing your next slide, so we're not seeing the notes down. That's okay.
So
we see the current slide as well. It's just
Yeah.
you see the next slide to the side. So it's pretty big. It's very visible. You're good.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, well, I'll just show all my cards as I go through then. I appreciate that. So yeah, again, thank you so much. And I just gave the overview for what we're doing for this session today. But I want to talk about why this is important. Why is housing important? It has a huge effect on every aspect of our lives, and this has been reinforced over the past years. now of the pandemic. So where you live, housing, that determines so much about your life. It determines where your children go to school. It's ease of getting to work, to healthcare, to recreation. It defines sometimes what physical danger you may be exposed to, or what positive physical environment you're in. It also defines some economic and social stability, and also is a tool for generational wealth building. It's especially important to have this conversation within this tight housing market. Housing that is affordable to rent or to own is essential for everyone to have access to, and the availability has direct impact on access and discrimination. As a key determinant of social health, or key social determinant of health, safe, stable, and affordable housing is essential to a child's well-being and success. Housing instability, homelessness, and unsafe housing can contribute to childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and negative outcomes. And I'm sure you're all aware of that. So by making more housing available, and especially housing that's safe and affordable and accessible to everyone, we need to make more state investments in affordable housing to reduce homelessness and to improve health and safety of the existing housing stock. Housing investments have been key to maintaining health and safety during the pandemic. And as we had the mantra of stay home, stay safe, the first year of the pandemic, we know we couldn't do that without having access to a safe home. Housing is indeed healthcare. So we hear housing, affordable housing all the time, but what does that actually mean? Housing is considered affordable when a household does not exceed 30% of their monthly income on housing costs. So it's relative. It's determined by the housing cost and the ability for a person to pay that. In rent, the cost is that utilities plus rent, and for homeowners that also includes, that's the mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities, and condo fees if that's applicable. One of the challenges in Vermont, and indeed a lot of the communities across the nation, is that rent and home prices rise much faster than the average household ability to pay. So a large portion of our workforce has low income wages. Let's take a look at our housing stock. So you can see from this, this is a statewide picture. Vermont is a little unique that it has such a high percentage of owned homes. About 25 is rental properties. We have a significant amount of vacation homes, and that varies drastically based on your town. In ski areas, you can have up to 70% vacation homes. It's so different between towns, but overall, there's a 17-ish% of our housing stock that's dedicated to seasonal, recreational, or occasional use homes. So what are the challenges that we're facing here? There's quite a lot. So when we're talking about affordable housing and the context in the state, we look at cost burden. And so that's when it's not affordable. That's when a household is paying over 30% of their income towards housing. And in Vermont, that's nearly 90,000 households, that's renter and owner households, that are paying over 30% of their income towards housing. Among that, there's 39,000, 16% of that pay over half of their income towards housing and these housing costs. And those households are especially high risk for housing instability, frequent moves, eviction, and of course, homelessness with those high costs. So you can see having those disparities, those challenges in the system alone is a hard system to work with. But beyond that, we have a constrained market, which means there's actually not a lot of housing stock. There's very the vacancy rate is extremely low across the state. The few counties that really stand out with unhealthy rates are Chittenden County, Windham County, and Washington County that hover just around 2% or below. That's very low. That means there's very little wiggle room for people to move to a better apartment, a more suitable apartment, or even access an apartment. Contributing to that pinch is the aging housing stock. We have the 5th oldest in the nation, of course. And what that means is there's maintenance, deferred maintenance, that's just building up on these properties and results in homes that are no longer or increasingly less safe to live in. They're not healthy and they're not safe. And the ability for small landowners to address those costs is a very high barrier. So what that's doing is that's adding another pressure to this housing stock, to this rental housing stock. So when there's already a vacancy rate that's hovering so low, and then you're also having these homes that are becoming less and less available and less safe, that's shrinking the stock. And it's not being added to at a very quick rate. So the housing crisis that we hear about all the time, we're talking about the housing crisis on every level so often. We hear it in the media, we hear it in conversations and on a townwide basis. It's not new. It's not new, and the pandemic has definitely exacerbated that. But because of the lack of adding additional units and addressing these deferred maintenances, that's made a crunch in this system and resulted in a housing crisis. On top of that, home ownership has become increasingly out of reach for average Vermonters. This very, very hot market that we're in has made it pretty much out of reach for folks who are at a traditional level that they could traditionally be able to step into home ownership. Now the house prices, the market rates are just out of reach. So those folks are staying in the rental market. So that's creating this stuck effect. And then of course we have folks experiencing homelessness, a lot of folks experiencing homelessness. This is a count tallied at the end of 2021 here on the screen, over 900 families, including 402 children living in motels at the end of the year. The pandemic has forced us as a state to address homelessness differently, and we've been able to provide actual shelter for homeless families, but there's still so much work to do in this area. And the fact that the fact that there's no housing stock to move those folks into, it's really just hampering the ability to address these situations. So I view, as I mentioned, I studied environmental studies, I view the housing system as an ecosystem. You know, there's all these different niches. There's home ownership, there's private development, there's affordable housing, there's services for folks experiencing homelessness. And what's critically important is for movement, their ability to be movement and choice within all of those. And when we have these external pressures that are just constraining it, there's no movement. And it's creating this stuck crisis that we are currently in. So here's a picture of Vermont. We have a growing number of low-income households since 2000. So there's the reality is there's a growing number of folks in the state who need support in accessing housing. This slide paints a picture of what we were just talking about. It really shows that the numbers just don't add up for most families. So this is from the National Low Income Housing Coalition Out of Reach report, which they produce every year. And it looks actually town to town and statewide across the nation. It looks at wages and it looks at market rate housing, and it lets us know what a household would need to earn in order to afford a market rate 2-bedroom apartment. And that's called the housing wage. And in Vermont, the housing wage is $23.68 an hour, or a $49,000 salary. That's not reflective of our reality. I know you're familiar with this. This is not what most people are making. So therein lies the problem. I'll give you a little example of a family we've been working with. They have a household size of 5. They have a mother, her mother, and 3 kids. And together they have a household income of $61,623. That's 72% area median income. And they pay $1,400 in rent a month, and on top of that, $200 in storage. So that's $1,600 a month for this family for housing costs. Now, a household with 3 kids has a lot more expenses besides housing to contend with. So that's an example of some numbers that are pinching that family. So what's the delivery system in Vermont? How are we creating housing? And there's a whole bunch of different avenues for creating housing. We have community-based nonprofit organizations like the Windham and Windsor Housing Trust. We have Evernorth, a regional nonprofit that partners with local organizations. We have public housing authorities that are both statewide and local, and we have for-profit developers. And this is just a nice map that shows you the service area of all the nonprofit developers across the state. So you see that we cover every inch of the state. And what we do, and what the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board supports, is building permanently affordable homes across the state. And that's key for our advocacy at the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. And it's key for ensuring that families across Vermont can afford their homes this year and also 90 years from now. We know that we'll always likely have folks who have wages that don't match market rate. So we need to ensure that it's affordable for families. And so that's what we're prioritizing in our policy, and that's what the legislators are working with now, and the Vermont Affordable Housing, the Vermont VHCB, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, really works for. And I want to just follow up that family that I was talking about who pays $1,600 in rent. They just became homeowners through our shared equity program, which is a program that ensures permanent affordability for homeowners in perpetuity. They were able to close on a home that was at $150,000 at market rate. We had a $52,000 down payment grant. And it's a shared equity program, which is it's a community land trust model. It's very successful, been used across the country, where the nonprofit owns the land underneath and the homeowner owns the building, the land, the home, and builds equity in that way. And they were able to move from paying $1,600 a month for rent to now having a mortgage, which includes the property tax cost of $688.93. That gives this family, this household, $1,000 to use per month on other expenses, which will be very needed because we know that they have other expenses. And so that's an example of permanent affordability, having that shared equity model. So that's an on the ground example. Something that's very, very critical to this conversation is fair housing and equal opportunity. So fair housing, is the right to equal opportunity in housing choice and the right to rent, buy, or live in a dwelling free from discrimination. This is a critical piece of legislation that it's not legislation, it is law. And it's critical to this conversation. Segregation and pervasive discrimination in housing contributes to many of the inequalities that divide the communities in Vermont. And where fair housing is not in compliance, where folks are not following fair housing, that's where people become vulnerable to homelessness and neighborhood divestment and disparities. So it's critical to add this level to the conversation. So getting to the nitty-gritty. Here's a model that we advocate for at the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. This is called the Three-Legged Stool, and it's a evidence-based approach for ending homelessness. And so there's three aspects to it. There's supply, that means the housing production, the housing stock. There's the subsidy, that's the support in making sure that it is in fact affordable for the families. And then there's the stability, and there's services that go along with it. So that's, case management to work with folks to access resources to make their housing more stable or their job more stable, or ensuring that folks in the community can create bonds and a sense of belonging. It's really important. But something here that's not actually outlined in this picture, but is critical to point out, is equity and justice as a stool, is the seat of that stool that ties it all together and really makes this effective. So I'm going to dive into each portion of these really quickly. Rental subsidies. This is the portion of the stool, that leg, that ensures that the family does not pay over 30% of their income. So these are some resources that are available in the state. And I'll note that more than half of the low-income households do not have rental assistance. And so that contributes to the, 36,000 Vermonters that are paying over 50% of their income towards housing. Homelessness assistance. There's a lot here on the slide. I'm not going to go through each one, but there's support for families across the spectrum. Something that's critical here is the work of case management, which I just mentioned. This is the support, this is the services, that's the really critical leg of the stool that ensures that the family can stay in housing when it has it and access resources that they need to either access housing or to stay in it. And the last but not least of the stool is the funding for the housing stock. So this is really where I'm coming in with the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition's priorities. The Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition is a statewide organization made up of over 90 members and member organizations that advocate for fair, decent, and affordable housing. And every year we put together a list of priorities, which we also work with other coalitions like the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance to kind of build on each other's messages, because we know they're intersectional and we know that each can help the other achieve our goals, our shared goals. So one of our top priorities that's always in our list is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to fully support the statutory funding for this group. They invest so much across the state in really critical program developments of creating housing stock that's so very needed. Recently, I heard Josh Hanford, the commissioner of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Community Development, quote that there's a 30% success rate for the state vouchers. which when I first heard that, I was kind of having a hard time wrapping my head around that because it's a low number and I was concerned, and rightfully so. So that means out of everyone who has a housing voucher, there's only 30%, 1/3 essentially of those folks that can actually find a home to use that voucher with. So that just exemplifies this housing crisis that we're in, that there is not enough stock. We really do need to build more. Another priority that we have on our list is a rental housing safety bill. This safety bill has been actually, in one iteration or another, has been in negotiations for quite a while, but we're in a very good place now this year. This is to ensure that there is a rental registry and to make the inspection system professional so that folks who are living in rental housing can ensure that their homes are being kept up to code, kept up to health and safety. And paired with that is this program, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, that works with private landowners to bring their homes back up to health and safety. There was a really successful program that this is based off of that we worked with last year through the CARES Act, and talking to a very hyper local property owner in Bellows Falls. She owns 2 buildings and lives in one of them. She says, all of these buildings in town, almost all of these buildings in town, require plumbing and electric work, which are huge cost items. But she was able to do that because of this program, and bring these homes back on the market. One of her buildings had been off of the market for over 30 years. And now it's a beautiful place right within walking distance of the school. Another program that we're supporting is the support and services at home. We're supporting the continued funding for this. And another important program is the tax credit expansion, which is expanding the affordable housing tax credit in the budget in order to expand upon the manufactured homes down payment program, which is an avenue for folks to get into home ownership through manufactured homes, which is an important piece of the puzzle. So today, when you go to your legislators and you have lunch with them, number one, make sure that you thank them. They are so busy and they are doing so much and dedicating so much of their time to doing this work. They also are your friends and neighbors. It's a citizen legislator. So you know these folks and you build relationships with these folks and you can talk with them as a normal person, which is incredibly special. We don't have them across the country. That is unique to us. And so we're very lucky that our legislatures are so accessible. So do make sure that you thank them for the amazing work that they've done. Please urge them to support the S210 bill. That's the rental housing and safety bill. And also thank them for their advocacy for the full statutory funding for VHCB, and urge all the legislatures to in turn support full funding of the VHCB in the budget bills. These are both critical items for expanding and supporting the existing rental market. And as we talked about, it's just so constrained. We need to take every avenue possible to make sure that we open up that ecosystem. We make sure that there's movement between the different niches, or else we'll continue within this stuck and constrained system where a lot of folks are in either unhealthy situations or close to it. So these are critical items. Here's a list of resources that I think we can share after this. But if you're excited about data and excited to dig into more information, please do take the time to click through all these links and dig into this information. I just wanted to share one last story, which is one of the reasons I deeply care about this work. A community member here shared with me this story, and she is an amazing human because she's a lactation consultant, and I know you all know the very, very, very critical nature of that work, and that she goes into so many different households to support new mothers as they're adapting to new mother life. And she shared with me that she was called to a home. It was a Windham and Windsor Housing Trust development, and the new mother brought her in and was so proud to show her around and was so happy of this beautiful home that she was able to afford and able to live in. And this community member, this lactation consultant, was like, there it is. That's the importance right there. So thank you very much for listening to my TED Talk. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now so I can actually see your faces. And I would love to open it up to questions and to have discussion. I saw that a couple of items came up in the chat and I haven't gotten the chance to yet look at them, but I'm excited to open up the conversation. Let me see. Okay, that's a long comment. Does anyone have any questions right off the bat that they'd like to ask? I feel like that was a lot of information that I just shared, and I'm sure that you all are pretty familiar with how housing overlaps with early childhood. But I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Why did you choose to come into the housing info session? How do you see in your work, how do you see this as important, or do you? Yeah, Linda, go ahead.
Marion, thank you. That was amazing information. Like you said, it's so much. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more. Did you mention something about adults with disabilities? Are there special programs for that population?
Yes, that's the support and services at home program that I mentioned as one of the legislative priorities. It's an incredible program. There's a few different factors that go into it, but it's a statewide initiative, and on site there's a SASH coordinator and a wellness nurse that kind of work together to help folks live independently, adults with disabilities or elderly folks, just independent living and offering the support. And it's really beautiful. It's a great program, and it offers this community health perspective. That's wonderful. I can't say enough of good things about it.
Thank you. I've heard SASH, and I always thought it was for elderly folks, and it wasn't for the adults with disabilities population. So I'd often heard that SASH, and so thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
As someone who just recently moved into a new place within the past few months, the one thing my fiance and I really struggled with was the down payment. I mean, for $1,150, they required $3,450 down just for first, last, and security. We had to take out a personal loan just to even get it, and now we're having to put this personal loan on top of another one for our wedding coming up. And it's a little ridiculous how much some renters will charge just for a down payment, not even considering like having to pay for next month's rent. So our rent went from paying $1,150 to almost $1,600 a month just with utilities and paying off the loan.
Yeah. You're not alone. It's a hardship.
And it's the only one that was available for 2 years that allowed pets, and it doesn't even allow dogs, which is a big, big part for a lot of people. I've seen like 5 different friends within the past few months who've had to rehome their animals because a lot of renters won't allow it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really hard market. I'm so sorry that that's a really hard, that's a high price. It's a lot to juggle. It's an example of the market that we're working with.
I know a lot of people who are trying to buy homes just because nowadays end up costing about the same. But it's always that down payment of, even if you're renting or paying a down payment for a home, no one can afford it. But renting and paying for a home ends up costing about the same.
Yeah, that's the thing. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, traditionally, if rent is that high, it is about the same as a mortgage, but this housing market has become extremely hot. So homes that 4 years ago were in the $150,000, $180,000 range are way more. So then the mortgage then increases, and a lot of renters we've experienced, actually, a lot of folks who traditionally would step into homeownership are just kind of saying, no, I'm waiting for this to go because I can't afford, I literally cannot afford that. So yeah, it means that they're staying renters, they're staying in that system, and it's stuck. We're stuck. We need more house, we need more stock on so many levels. And that's kind of the important thing I find in this conversation. Whenever we're talking about, we need more affordable housing, we absolutely do. We absolutely do. And we need more home ownership opportunities. We need more at every single level. We need everyone to be involved in this.
Seems like that's a great story for legislators to hear too, that
Yeah.
Courtney just shared.
Absolutely. Yeah, personal experiences and stories are so critical. So when we do advocacy days for our congressional delegation. We have one coming up next week, and they always do trainings kind of like this for that. And of course, it's a different ecosystem. I'm saying that too much. I'm going to step away from ecosystem. Of course, it's a different context down there because they're in DC and they're congressional delegates and very, very, very busy. So they train us in saying, okay, here are your asks. This is your one simple ask. You have this number, you're going to ask for it, and make sure you open with that because they're so busy. You might just have 1 minute to talk to these people. So when I was thinking about this training or this info session, I was like, oh, maybe I can bring some of that back. But it is luckily a different environment here because these folks, as I said, are your friends and neighbors, and even though they're extraordinarily busy, I think they are able to take a little bit more time to listen to your stories. But a tip would be to open with your ask and talk about these two funding priorities, or these two priorities, the VHCB and the S210, rental, housing, and safety. We're really focusing on housing stock.